Hey guys, Mike here. In this video, I'm going to explain the only two skills that you ever need to complete Ultimate. So let's get right into it. So the only two skills that you ever need are one, problem identifying, and two, problem solving. That's all you need. For Ultimate, there's a lot of problems that can arise during prog or during trying to clear. And a lot of those problems can be, internal. So it's just you. There's issues with your gameplay that need to be solved. For example, your rotation, if you're not doing enough damage, if you are personally not that good at mechanics, or you're not that consistent at mechanics. For example, say your success rate at a certain mechanic is only 87%. That's a problem that needs to be addressed and that needs to be solved. Ideally, you want to get your success rate at every mechanic up to 99%, ideally 100%. So for me personally, like if I can't do a mechanic consistently 100% of the time, I personally view that as a problem, and that's something I try to solve, right? So to solve the issue of inconsistency at mechanics, I try to come up with strategies that will help me become more consistent. And a lot of that is trying to figure out, like, are there markers on the arena I can use? Are there little maybe shadows of ads so I can see behind me? Or is there just a better strategy that can be used to make the team more consistent at the mechanics? Those are some ways I try to solve the issue of consistency for mechanics. Rotation is just identifying, especially for uptime mechanics where you have to do like your burst during a really hardcore mechanic, then you just have to, use cues, whether it's the little clock icon on your GCD that's rolling, or just know when certain OGCDs or abilities are meant to be fired during that uptime mechanic. Just trying to practice those and identify those and making sure, like, really focus during those times. That's one way to solve that issue of being more consistent at uptime mechanics. And then there's also you also have to be able to identify issues with the team, especially if you're in a static. So if other players are inconsistent at mechanics, then you need to be civil about it, but you need to address them. So, maybe ask your teammates why they are not, or is there something that they don't get, or maybe you can provide them tips and say, like, if I'm like 100% consistent at this mechanic, but my teammate is not, then I can be like, hey, this is what I do to be more consistent in the mechanic. I look at this specific marking on the floor, and I always use this to always guide my character on where to go. And that's why I'm so consistent. And then that's how you help your static teammates on becoming more consistent, right? Because for ultimates, you need everyone to be 100% consistent, especially in the early phases, so that you can prog and see the later phase. So identifying problems, right? And don't be lax in thinking there's no problems. Like, if you haven't cleared the fight, there's obviously problems, right? A lot of the time people try to think, oh, well, I just need to see the mechanics more and then I'll see it. But like, if you're doing maybe 10 pulls and people still aren't getting it, there's definitely a problem there that needs to be addressed. And if you don't address these problems quickly, then especially in a static, people get frustrated at other players and they just they lose motivation, and just like the overall motivation of the group starts to decrease, right? All right, so identifying problems both internally at yourself and looking at the team and seeing where they're inconsistent. Another place to identify problems is probably mitigation. If certain raid wides are hitting too hard, or people have abilities that aren't on cooldown, which means they're not using it, then that needs to be addressed. Having a mitigation plan is in a static will always work. For PF settings, usually the good players will try to adjust and see where more mitigation is needed. Typically, they'll stick to the PF strats, which is generally a good idea. The last area of problems that need to be identified is DPS and damage. So if teammates aren't doing enough damage, we're just not going to clear, because obviously there's DPS checks, right? Assuming you are already perfect at your rotation, you're doing the most amount of damage as possible, you can try to help your teammates by seeing what issues are going on, like dropping GCDs, or is there are raid buffs not being aligned? You have to identify these things. It could be multiple reasons for this, and it's up to you to identify them and address them. Unfortunately, like for a static, if someone can't fix their problems, you probably have to kick them. That's not the best scenario. Like, if they're trying to improve and they're trying to put in the effort to be better, then once the problems are addressed, then yeah, obviously you can keep them around. But if they refuse to not only identify the problems and solve the problems, remember, it's the two things that I said that you need, then you probably have no choice but to kick the person. But I usually find that's pretty rare. Like, most people want to clear, right? So as long as people are self-motivated and willing to commit to these two two things, IDing problems and solving problems, then anyone can clear Ultimate. And these are just the two things I feel that any player and group needs to clear Ultimate. That's the only two things you need. You don't need motivation. You don't need anything else. And I hope you enjoyed that video, and thanks for